Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another movie discussion. Obviously, another one I'm just not doing with video, just audio, but I will probably edit in some photos and stuff for the video. But for today's movie discussion, I'm going to be doing a spoiler discussion of The Witcher. Was it Nightmare of the Wolf? The animated Witcher movie on Netflix. So if you haven't seen it, do know I'm going to go straight into spoilers and stuff like that. The movie's been out for a while, but with season 2 around the corner, I decided, well, I haven't watched it yet, so this is kind of a perfect time to watch it. So getting some insight into Vesemir, which I did not remember the name until rewatching season 1 and being like, right, Vesemir's the one who found Geralt. So it's about, I think this movie, I mean, just in general, like how I felt about it, I really enjoyed it. I liked a lot of the action, because obviously there's a lot more you can do when it comes to action in the, because I don't even know if that's, because I'm sure the video games aren't that wild when it comes to the action. I know live action isn't as well, because there's only so much you can do in the confines of, especially what I know of the Witcher video games, just a tiny bit I've seen. I don't think the action flows in that way, but there's a lot you can do. You can really heighten up the action. I don't even know if it's like that in the books, how crazy, especially that thing at the end where Vesemir's high in air. That's some certain video games. You could see that being it's definitely an anime thing, plus video games you could see stuff like that, aerial combat like that, off the walls bonkers. But aside from just the amazing action, it also gave us a really neat insight into Witchers we've never seen before. Because even the show, because if you're unaware, I've never played any of the video games and I've never read the books. My only experience with The Witcher is the tiny bit I've heard here and there from people talking about the video games and season 1. Now season 1's a lot fresher in my mind because I rewatched it, but Geralt is nothing like the Witchers we see, and it seems like that's by design, because especially Vesemir, when we get introduced, I'm he's a shit talker, isn't he? All he's doing when he's fighting that Lichen at the beginning was all he's doing is running his mouth. It's Geralt's the quiet stoic type. So it's just interesting to see, but I guess that's to show the difference of right, not every Witcher is like that. Because we've never spent enough time with another Witcher. The only other Witcher in season 1 was immediately killed off by the Striga early on in the season, and we saw him kind of do his thing for a tiny bit, but that was about it. So I thought it was kind of an interesting insight to kind of see, because we get peeks into, oh man, people hate Witchers, but it's mainly about the mutant things. Now we kind of get into the more personal reasons why, because Witchers are very disrespectful. I mean, that kid, his entire family was murdered, his 3 sisters and his dad, and the Witcher didn't want to do, Vesemir didn't want to help bury the bodies. It was I saved you, kid, I killed the monster, leave me the hell alone. So that's about it, and he bounced. So I think that kind of just speaks volumes, and he goes, and Tetra, she's the main kind of sort of antagonistic role in this, where she believes Witchers should be taken care of because they are these mutations that she's believing that they're causing. She actually believes that they're causing all these monster attacks and stuff like that, which, skipping around, she was right in the end, but her perspective was mainly coming from the view of she hated Witchers, just most people do, but we end up finding out later on, she has a personal vendetta when it comes to them. So, like I said, just kind of, quickly, we'll get to stuff, slowly but surely, but, first and foremost, let's kind of work our way through things. Vesemir, we see him, just living up the lifestyle as a Witcher, but we did get insight into him, he was just some boy, and unlike most people, Geralt, for example, didn't want to be a Witcher. Vesemir did, because it was yeah, it's better than a crappy life he was living with Illyana, and they were basically treated to nothing more than servants. He's right, we get a roof over our head, but barely enough. We get food in our belly, but barely enough. And it's the only time we actually get any money is when they need us to buy stuff for them. But Illyana was right, even this crappy existence we have is better than what we'd have out there in the world. We wouldn't have anything. But, Vesemir dreamed of, living a more lavish life, to be able to buy and do whatever he could for Illyana, because obviously, there was something there between them, but they never really acted upon it. But Vesemir met Deglan, a Witcher who came to help the lady that he served. She was possessed by a creature named the Mar, which it's so interesting because I think the closest thing we got to that, even though it's not a 1-for-1, the closest we got, I guess like the Jin thing would be kind of somewhat similar. I was thinking the Striga, but I mean that was more of a curse than that was more of a curse situation rather than straight up possession. But yeah, like the Mara has the ability to kind of like make you see stuff, because even at one point in time when Vesemir was trying to capture it, it manifested as Illyana so it could get away. So. And I thought maybe this speaks volumes about Deglan too, that he was like, no, we need to capture this thing so we can experiment it on, because that's the only way we're going to learn more about these creatures and how to battle them when the time comes, is if we capture and experiment on them. But when the time comes, like Vesemir wants to go with him, but Deglan's like, no, you hesitated back then, you're hesitating now, because he didn't want to leave, because leaving now would mean leaving Illyana behind, and he didn't want to leave her behind. But he kind of came to be a little frustrated with her because he wanted more out of life, you know? And he's like, you know, it's like, right, come with me, and she's like, no. He's like, he was like, as she was walking away after being frustrated with him, he was like, stay. She's like, no, you stay, Vesemir. But he left in the middle of the night because, like, this type of life isn't what he wanted. He wanted so much more, especially finding out how much Deglan got paid for this Mars situation. He wanted more. And so, you know, sadly, he didn't know all that went into becoming a Witcher, which even Geralt only touched on it a little bit. We know about the experiments that make them kill most of them, because I think he says, like, 1 out of 10 kids survive it or something like that. It's not very many. So... But we find out that's like the last stage of it. First, you kind of have to prove yourself through training and stuff like that. But then also, like, you kind of that Roman style thing of like, oh, like, you get thrown out in the wilderness. Basically, that happened to them. And most of them got murdered by all the creatures. And those who didn't murder came back heavily, like, wounded and scarred from the situation. Especially because Vesemir was trying to, like, that his buddy Tomas was trying to help him out, trying to make him not so scared. It's like, right, once we do this, there'll be nothing to be afraid of, because it's like, once we had this power, no one will be able to touch us. We'll be able to do whatever we want to, kind of live by our own means. But Tomas, amongst others, died. Now, this is something interesting. I don't think the TV show ever touched on, at least I don't remember them ever making a point of it, even rewatching it, that the medallions they have let them know where monsters are. I was like, oh, that never came. Did it come up, or was it just a background thing that they never explained, but it was always there? I never noticed that, but I thought that was kind of an interesting thing, because like the moment all those Witchers in making are there, all their like medallions start like shaking and vibrating and humming. So, but like I said, everyone came back wounded, and you kind of learn the ins and outs of, like, we meet the mages who basically make Witchers. It turns out they made a whole bunch of species that exist, species of monsters, because basically they were experimenting to see, like, oh, because naturally certain species with monsters would never mate with other species, well, from another species. So crossbreeding isn't possible naturally, but through alchemy and stuff it is. So basically these mages, on some way back in the day, created monsters that were too much for them to control, because most ended up dying, but the few that did survive, well, they were the badasses, they were the strong ones, and so Witchers had to be made to correct that. Interesting timing, because there's something movie-wise that came out fairly recently that kind of has a similar thing of like, oh yeah, you were basically created to make up for the mistake we made, which is like, yeah, that's super jacked up in the end to know that. But the mage in particular, the head honcho dude, who was basically saying that all of that was sealed away, made that so it would never happen again. But the fact is, you still have that knowledge isn't a good thing. But it's like that very knowledge is what lets them make Witchers. So, because I figured things were going to have a happy ending for the Witchers in this story, because Geralt talks about it in Season 1 that there aren't many Witchers left because the process in which to make them was lost. The people who can do it are no longer around, or at least whatever was necessary isn't around anymore. But it seems like it's the people with the knowledge of doing it. You probably all that, well, it seems like in the grand scheme of things, probably all of it, the text, you know, not just the people, but even the text and all the ingredients and what you need to know what to put together alchemy-wise to make them is all gone. And we actually get to see the process itself. And at the same time Vesemir's going through this, he had actually read a letter from Ilya. Basically, it's so interesting, and it makes you wonder, is that why Vesemir treated that kid the way he did? Because even though you're royalty, it's like the kingdom you was from. turns out that king, what was it, Quadin, I'm probably like butchering that, but they came and attacked that facility. Vesemir's dad died, didn't seem too broken up about it, and then your dad sacrificed himself to protect the lady and lord of the house. They ultimately still got anyway, but Illyana got taken in by them, and she's like, oh, I'm in a good place now, so it's probably best for both of us just to kind of put the past behind, like, holding on to it's just gonna be heavy. So she's like, I'm hoping you got everything that you wanted, like, you know, I'm happy, and they're treating me right, they're teaching me, like, even how to read and stuff, so I'm in a much better place, I'm serving good people, so hopefully things are well for you. And obviously, you see one by one, like, some of the children dying, which is like, I mean, he already went through a lot, because we saw with the youngest Vin about, like, oh, he didn't lose his arm as an adult, he lost his arm as a kid, which is pretty gnarly. But, seeing the process which they go through, it's like, right, it's one thing knowing that kids go through it, it's another thing seeing it, and just seeing their dead bodies get dragged away, like, yep. I mean, to be fair, we saw them, like, torn limb from the... I mean, that's another thing, too. Like, the show can get bloody. This got gnarly. I mean, once again, you could go a little further with this, because you could just get full, like, man, body parts are flying, heads are popping off, limbs are flying off. It's gushing blood. Like, it reminds me of, like, it gets bloody like Fist of the North Star bloody. I've never watched it, but I know Berserk can get nasty bloody, too. So, it's just kind of... I think it almost has that, like, style and feel to it, almost like Berserker, even though I've seen bits and pieces of Berserker. I've never read it. I do know, like, the creator passed, like, sometime this year, if I remember correctly. I didn't talk about it, but Vesemir met with God, I'm always butchering his name. Filavandrel. There we go. I have to always pause and remember it. And I was like, hey, we met him one time. His name came up a couple times during season 1, but obviously, like, because even at this point in the story, because you never know how long in the future it is before we get to what is essentially season 1 of the show, because time works differently with Witchers. They age slowly, so, like, there's no telling, like, how old Geralt actually is. But Macon was like, the fact is, so we don't, because by this point, the elves have pretty much been genocided already, and so he actually came to Vesemir for help, because some of their women started disappearing. At first they were thinking there was something else at play here, but then it became like more and more like daughters and women start disappearing. So he actually wanted Vesemir's help, but Vesemir was like, getting mixed up in elf drama, no thanks, you know? It's like, yes, Geralt's the same way of like, he didn't want to get involved with a lot of stuff, but regardless, because he is an honorable person, once again showing you the difference between him and Vesemir, because Vesemir was only about looking after himself, but that's also because of like the upbringing he had. It's just like, right, he went from nothing, and when you go from nothing, you get very stringent about like, nah, I want it all. I'm gonna get everything I could. You know, I don't need like the glory and just like to be able to tell the stories, have women swooning over you, the money, the prestige. Yes, people hate you, and that's one thing, but it's like, yeah, let people talk. I don't care. Granted, didn't know, like, obviously you had people like Tetra who were out there like, nah, we're gunning for you type of thing. So, because she kept trying to convince her king, but who we didn't know at the time was Illyana, which I was like, I thought that was an interesting development. Like, Illyana, of course. I was like, wow. I figured they'd bump into each other at some point in time, but just like, once again, showcases like how much time passed. Like, he looks like he's in his 20s or 30s. She's like, she even says later on, like, oh, I'm 70. But yeah, like that Illyana thing, that's why I thought it was so interesting, because I thought she was up to something when she was like, oh, like so defensive of the Witchers. I thought she was playing something there, but it's like, no, she was defensive of the Witchers because like one of the people she cared about for a long time, and still does, Vesemir, is a Witcher, so she's not going to paint them with a broad brush. Because Tetra kept bringing up, like, right, you have a seat on a court, but that's only because your husband died. You didn't earn that seat. You weren't chosen for that seat. You only got it by proxy of who you were married. But she kept referencing her background. I was like, what was that about? It's like, now we know. She was a servant, and the son of the family at the time that, you know, her family name, her husband, he was the son at the time, and the family treated her well, but the son in particular really treated her well, and they eventually fell in love. They even have kids. She's like, hell, even one of my kids has grandkids. As like, I'm a grandmother at this point in time too, so. But what escalated things a lot more is like, you know, once again, the knights running their mouth. It's like, because Luca and Vesemir were hanging out, be like, you know, talking shop with some of the ladies, telling their stories, and some knights didn't appreciate it and started some crap. They ended up dead. Luca and Vesemir got locked up for it. So now it's a situation where, like, right, there's a monster out there still killing people. You have to go and kill it. If you go and kill it, then, you know, it'll clear the air. You'll not suffer any ramification for killing the knights. And he's like, well, I'd be reluctant to have you go with me because I want it to happen to me. Which is like, oh, she's like, that's sweet, but I'm not the one going with you. And it's like, of course Tetra would be. So this unlikely duo has to work together, and they have their issues, they're back and forth. But she tells an interesting story. Once again, nothing in the show really dabbled into how much of an asshole the Witchers can be, but her story is like, yo, a Witcher was saying that, oh, a priest was cursed, said it was this girl that he was bothered by, killed her, the priest actually got better. Well, it turns out a cook got paid by the Witcher. It's like, cool, you poison that dude's food and we frame this witch, dude, it'll be fine, it'll be perfect, you know? It's like, the irony is that they dished that out, and now, like, they as a people, Witchers in general, are having to suffer the ramifications for, like, you know, because the thing is, they all get a little, maybe it's just the way Deglan raised a lot of them to be like that, because his personality was like that. He instilled that upon the others of just, that only thing you should care about is coin. I love that he's even chastising Vesemir about, like, oh, shouldn't you have at least done something about that kid's parents' body? He's like, Vesemir was like, I don't want to hear that noise. But it's like, yeah, ain't like you're the most, like, honorable person either, but he was only saying that because, like, right, we got people breathing down our necks. Like, you should have just spared us and yourself the trouble by just not, you know. But that's the thing, like, this bubble was gonna pop eventually, because it wasn't just Vesemir. He was a symptom of something much larger that people, but also they make it pretty clear that, you know, the people of this world aren't tolerant. I mean, the elves will tell you that, and they talk about the dwarves too, like, oh, it wasn't just the elves, the dwarves got it too, which I don't know if they really even, because we met dwarves in season 1 when they were on that, when Jaskier and Geralt read into Yennefer during that dragon hunting job. What was that, episode 6, I believe? That in itself, that's the only times we saw dwarves in the show. No, we met a dwarf before, but he was kind of a servant. So we didn't really get too much experience with them, and we never really talked about it. But there's a line of dialogue that kind of makes it sound like that dwarves got it just like the elves. Probably doesn't sound like anyone got it as hard as the elves did. For what reason? I don't know. But circling back to it, despite everything, Tetra and Vesemir actually make a pretty good team, especially when they were going up against that creature, because they did have the conversation about magic, like fire magic isn't really legal for like mages. It's like it is, but it's just because like most mages can't control it. So I think, which speaks volumes, because Yennefer like full blown sparked up the battlefield in the season 1 finale. So. But also, like, Vesemir does that, too. Because I didn't know if that was something, because, once again, I don't know the full access to all the spells that a Witcher can perform, or at least Geralt can perform in the games. Once again, I don't know what the full extent of what magic is like in the books. But just based on the show, like, at least with Geralt, we kept seeing it throughout the episode, but it's basically that energy push. It's essentially like it's basically like a psychic push or gust of wind. Is kind of his go-to move to like push enemies away and stuff like that. That's the main thing he does in the TV show, but that might be because at this point that's the only magic he really does know, because like maybe fire isn't his specialty, at least at this point, so he can't fully utilize it like that. But like Vesemir can, because his main two was that the energy blast and the fire. Like I said, they probably like hyperbolize that a little bit more because of it being the anime like style and aesthetic they're going for, so they hyperbolize the action way more than maybe it would be in the video games or even the books. But obviously you can, like it brought up way earlier, you can go a lot further than you can with live action in those regards. But like I said, them working together is pretty dope. They actually made, and that's why like them actually being adversaries all the way through surprised me, because I thought it was gonna be like, right, you don't get along, but eventually you'll come together. It's like, nope. It seemed like maybe that her hate for him was waning a little bit, but then like they start dealing with the Kitsu situation, which the moment I was like seeing Kitsu and he took on the form of a fox, I was like, oh, like Kitsune. If you don't know what Kitsune is it's kind of pulled from Japanese folklore. I believe it's specifically Japanese folklore. Like they're tricksters, they're foxes. They kind of get like foxes in Japanese mythology are treated as tricksters. A great example would be like the Ninetales from Naruto. He would be like a kitsune. It's kind of what those are. So I always think that's I think that's such. I also love that word too. Makes me think of Teen Wolf, because Kira was a kitsune. Tangents and all that aside. But the moment it's like, oh, it was mutated because it tastes like a Mar. Which I thought those are interesting little things about taste. Like, for example, Tetra could tell basically, I forgot what she was talking about, like spells and stuff like that. Oh, right, back at, God. Oh, I'm blanking on it. The place where, like, they go to train and stuff. Aratuza. She talked about how the food was disgusting, so they use illusion magic to make it seem more tastier, but the aftermath taste of illusion magic is bitter, so she tasted a little something and she could taste the bitterness, so she knew it was an illusion. Just like he could smell, like in the Kitsu's blood was a Mar, because he had experience with them. It's actually the first monster he ever crossed paths with, interestingly enough. And they follow the path, and we found that, essentially all the dead elves, like one of their fortresses and stuff like that. And there, like, we find out the Kitsu was an elf that was morphed, and it turns out, obviously, like, they pretty much set it up a while back. You're like, oh, okay, the moment Deglan made that remark about, like, oh, if only there was more monsters, you're like, you're making more monsters for profit. Turns out they are. Even this Kitsu, she was experimented on and became what she became, which there's a parallel to be drawn, because, I mean, is it that surprising? I mean, Deglan, as well as others, made Witchers. They are considered abomination mutations, and now it's like, right, you just went off and did, well, you do the same thing to many other kids, like Vesemir, and then you literally did the same thing to Kitsu. And so, there is a child left who had survived the experiments, but Filavandrel ended up taking her, but Tetra wanted to kill her. But even Phil was like, yeah, the same thing that they're saying about this child, they'd say the same thing about you. But it's like, right, keep that child in your care, and like, if it ever steps out of the way, he's like, I will take care of it myself, quietly waiting for you and your blade. But and that's the thing of like, oh, how dare you, like, you, for once, Tetra's calling him out because, like, oh, you're responsible for making this. He's like, I knew nothing about this. But she's like, oh, like, yeah, you got this blood on your head with all that you've done. And he's like, really, Tetra? You want to go there? All right, look at all, like, how dirty your hands are. And she kind of looks at her hands and they're dirty, and she tries to wipe them clean. But it's like, that's why I'm like, you're a hypocrite. Like, the mass genocide of the elven people? Like, what are you... You know? It's like, you want to act like the Witchers are terrible people, but it's like, oh, because the Witchers are scoundrels and they're doing terrible stuff to humans. You want to do it to elves? Who cares? Elves are terrible shit. It's like, man, there's a lot of racism in this world. But yeah, then she immediately buries the place. I'm like, oh, is she doing that because, like, oh, you're trying to cover up the little, yeah, you don't want a reminder of what you've done. It's like, oh no, so you can trick the Kitsu into helping you. I'm like, oh, that's what I was like, yo, Tetra, you suck. But to be fair, she's driven by revenge by a lot, just like the Kitsu's driven by revenge, so is she. I mean, revenge is quite the beast in this world. I mean, you never know. Like, you know, because we find out later on that this story Tetra told about that Witcher killing an innocent woman, and it was all a ploy because you poisoned the priest, and it was all a ploy and everything. That woman that was killed was her mom. And it's like, damn, dude, like, of course you're going to be pissed at Witchers. You're going to, you know, and even she feels sympathy for Vesemir because it's like, right, you didn't ask for this. He kind of did, but it's also like, right, you were a boy, you didn't know any better. They took advantage of a boy wanting so much more, so she felt bad for her. But that's the sad thing, like, everyone's part of, like, everyone's a victim of all of this in some shape or form. I mean, it's like Tetra is driven by her rage, even to the point Vesemir was like, right, I promise you these experiments will stop and these monsters running rampant like this won't continue forever. So I make it, but it's like, Deglan wouldn't back down. He was like, nah, you ain't gonna come to my house and try to step to me, essentially. Because, you know, Vesemir tried to stop him. Didn't want to fight him because he's like, the closest thing he has to a dad is like, you gave me all of this. But he's like, yeah, you never bothered to ask what was happening because you were so busy lining your pockets with money. And it's like, and that's fine, you know. But the thing, you know, for it's like we were made to kill monsters, not to make more of them. But for Deglan, it's like, me doing this is keeping us alive. Humans are going to hate us regardless, but at the very least, if there's more monsters, we give them a reason not to hate us, because they'll keep us around because we serve a purpose. They'll disdain us at all they want to. They can hate us, say we're mutants, blah, 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 but who do they turn to when they got monsters issues? They can hate us all they want, but they're quick to turn to us when they need us, so... It's a combination of hatred and pride that just gets in the way, that caused all of this, sadly. I kind of figured when it was all said and done, like, I was like, I know Illyana's not going to survive this. I mean, she's an older lady anyway, but also, like, I just had a feeling just, you know, just to screw Vesemir over, I knew that she wasn't going to make it. But like I said, that battle was nuts. I mean, like, all the Witchers got ripped through. If it wasn't by the army, if it was by the mages or the monsters... I think it's almost poetic that the monsters came from the place that they got dumped in at years ago. I mean, that's like the main place to get the most vicious of vicious monsters, that's kind of like their hub ground, that's swamp. So poor Sven, oh man, because it sucks. Like, Luca got executed, Sven gets killed, not, you know, especially because those are the two that because they're at least two of the people that Vesemir grew up with. Like, they grew up in this Witcher thing together, you know, and it sucks that it came down to this, that Luca got executed, and he was like the smart aleck, you know, he was like, oh, you know, he doesn't have enough money to get like a limp dick man whore or something like that at the beginning. It's sad that it came down to this, but Deglan went hard into pain upon seeing all essentially his children murdered. It's like, he even says it, these were all my boys, so he went on a spree too. But like I said, your boy Vesemir up in the sky, like, going at it, like, especially against the large one, slicing its stomach open and like going inside of it and blasting it. Like I said, it feels like something on an anime. It also feels like, definitely feels video game-ish, in like, it reminds me of something you'd see like in a Devil May Cry with just how crazy that battlefield got. But yeah, the whole thing about the Kitsu getting inside of his head just while Illyana's about to get executed. I was like, oh boy, this ain't going to be good. I was like hoping he'd snap out of it in time, and luckily he did, but the Kitsu showed him everything he wanted. You know, it's like, right, he had a life of Illyana. The fact is they had a child and everything, but despite everything, you know, because it's like, oh, look at all this coin, the life that we could have. But he was like, no, you never wanted that. You were content with things being as they were. He was the one that always wanted more money and stuff because he wanted to do something for her and get them a better life. Obviously, after that letter, he didn't worry about it as much because it's like, right, she's in a happier place. She said all that because she wanted him to move on. It's like, I hope that you're taken care of and I hope you're happy. I'm in a good place. But she was saying all that because it was true, but also because she wanted Vesemir to move on. So I was almost wondering if he would at one point get the Kitsu to remember and realize that, not remember, but realize that Tetra's the one that actually destroyed that place. Because it's like, oh, that child of yours is dead. It's like, which we know it's not. Filavandrel has the child, but obviously she's trying to point the Kitsu towards him, so. And the moment he decapitated the Kitsu, stabbed her, I was like, oh boy, this is going to be a trick, isn't it? Like, I thought the one who got decapitated at first was going to be Illyana. No, he stabbed Illyana, and it was all part of a trick. And, you know, Tetra's like, right, because she's so dead set, I'm like, no, I got to wipe out all of you. But Deglan ends up killing her in the end, you know? And it's like, right, he ends up dying and saying, like, right, save the rest of the Witchers, because now, like, there are no more with the mages. At least that mage is dead, but I'm assuming the others are too. Without them, the place is on fire. He's like, you know, all my boys are gone, so I need you, you know, to go and make those Witchers, because Illyana like led them out, or at least one of them had already found a way to sneak around and sneak out, so he just led the charge of getting them out, and Illyana helped them. And so Vesemir took her to a quiet place, like, because the Kitsu got in, because he was about to attack the Kitsu, but she's like, no, the Kitsu didn't ask for this either. It's like, once again, they're all like, it's a crappy situation that was caused. Neither one of them asked for this. He didn't ask for more monsters to be made. You know, he asked to be made into what he is to some extent, but also, once again, he was a boy not knowing what he was really asking for. And the Kitsu didn't ask to be made into what she was. So we do see her leave too. So once again, it's just all this death and destruction. So, and obviously, Vesemir takes off with Illyana, but you're like, right, he's not going to be able to get her help. And so he takes her to the lake just to see it. She's like, oh, it almost feels like it isn't real. She dies in his arm. It's like, right. Like, she has a family back home. Like she said, she has children. She even a grandchild. But it's just that heartbreaking thing of, like, Vesemir's main reason was, like, she was a big motivator for it. Yet, it's the thing of, right, everything that you aimed for, like, what was the point of it? Like, everything you cared about is gone. Deglan, gone. All the Witchers that were basically your brothers and friends, gone. The woman that you've always loved, you wanted to start all this for her sake, to give her so much more, you know, gone. Because the moment they were reunited, she's like, oh, I'm 70, but she's like, I'm 70 as well. And he made out with her because he was like, you're still beautiful to me. You're still the woman, you're still that girl I loved all those years ago. Like, you've never left my mind. You've never left my thoughts. He thought, like, right, you're living a happier life, so why would I ever go bothering you? You kind of let me go, so I guess I kind of had to let you go, but you were always there in my heart, just like, you know. And in Illyana's mind, it's probably like, right, I've led a full life. I've had, my husband's gone, but, you know, I loved someone deeply, and they loved me, and I had children. I had a good life, you know. But it still doesn't, you know, just when she found her way back into his life, they found their way back to each other. Of course, it was going to end tragically like this, but, Vesemir catches up with the other kids, and he's like, cool, okay, so I'm going to give you a choice here and now, because this is the last time you're going to be able to hesitate. So either walk away now, and he mentions the bald-headed kid, the one who wanted to try and find a way out, was Geralt. So, is that actually how many Witchers? Because and that implication is saying there's only 5 Witchers left, is what that's kind of implying. We know there's only a few left, but I'm sure that's like them taking licenses with the, you know, source material in that regard. Like, is it that few? I doubt it, but it's probably far and few in between, but probably not that low of a number, because that would be implying, like I said, there's only 5. So, but like I said, because of how Deglan ran things, Vesemir is going to take it upon him to raise them a little different. And that's why I'm like, that's why I think Geralt ended up being the way he is. Because even he took offense to it when, was it Triss? During the whole Striga thing, it's like, wow, yeah, you let people think that a Witcher stole off with their money rather than let them know, yeah, he's actually dead, you know? Because, and that hate only probably perpetuate, that whole incident, all that death, that, who knows, once again, how long ago that was, but that hate continues, because it couldn't have been that long ago. It was probably a couple decades ago. I'm sure Geralt doesn't even know that him and Filavandrel have like a connection through Vesemir, which, once again, his name was brought up last season, and kind of spoilers, you'll probably know by the time, because this probably isn't going to go up until maybe next week anyway, but yeah, I know he's going to be in season 2, because I didn't realize like he had been cast and who was playing him. It's the actor who plays Constantine in Killing Eve. He's the actor playing an older Vesemir. Like, he is, like, older, so that means some time has, at least enough time has passed. Well, because Geralt is however old he is, because, you know, he's probably, like, well, like, you never know. He could be, like, 70 or 80. Because also, like, Yennefer is, like, way older than you would think she is. So she's, like, she's decades old. Even though she still looks like a 20-year-old, and I say 20-year-old just because I know the actress who plays her is like only in her 20s, so. But yeah, like I said, I think this is kind of an interesting insight to kind of get a little bit more background into Vesemir before we, I'm curious, like, are they going to, like, how much, like, it is Netflix, so I'd assume they'd keep a lot with what was set up in this. They'll probably fudge stuff a little. I mean, there's probably enough like in between stuff that they can fill in certain gaps to be what they need them to be. They'll probably keep stuff. They probably kept stuff vague enough, so it's like, cool, we can just make the canon whatever. Because I think a lot of the same people who work on the TV show worked on this movie too. So I don't think it was like separate teams. I think it was a lot of the same like directors and like writers and probably producers and stuff like that too. So I think they probably kept it close enough in the realm of the continuity of the show because they're probably trying to be as faithful to the books as possible. Because I think the show is supposed to be a prequel to the books. So I think the movie is even more like I don't know about the books, like how far the books go back. Like, is the stuff that's getting covered stuff that exists in the books canon, or is this just them kind of taking licensed liberty with like stuff way in advance? Like, oh, let's kind of fill in some story that doesn't exist this far back for some of these characters' background. I'm really pumped to see what season 2 has in store for us, and how, like, you know, we're going to hear certain. I know we're definitely going to get more Filavandrel, because once again he was only in season 1 for like 1 episode. We heard his name pop up a few times. They referenced Sniffleguard like 1 time too. I believe that was that print. I wonder, did that kid grow up to be anyone? Like, I don't know if they ever focused on like what his name was and stuff like that. I'm curious also like what kingdom that was. I don't remember if they said what kingdom. The kid. It was what was it? It was the kingdom with a K. I don't remember its name now. I said it early in the episode. But the one Tetra like was working for and stuff like that. I don't know if they ever gave that one a name. Maybe they did. I'm just curious to see like how much of this will ever like pop up in season 2. I have to wait a couple hours because it's like what? It's 11. Yes, it's 11 p.m. at almost 11:20 at the time of me finished. Well, where I am right now in the recording. So we got because I live on the East Coast, got about a little less than 4 hours before season 2 drops. Because sadly, things on Netflix don't drop until like 3:01 here on the East Coast. But I digress. But that's kind of enough of me prattling off. So obviously I just want to share my thoughts about things, what I thought was kind of interesting. So that pretty much is all I wanted to talk about. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.